We're heading into spring, and I'm thinking about my grill, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to burn some meat, God damn it.
All right. Welcome once again to Free Associations from the Boston University School of Public Health, the Public Health and Medical Journal Club podcast. For anyone who is as confused by the latest health study as I am by why my dog feels the need to walk in and shake his collar at the beginning of an episode. Do you guys have any animals interrupting you guys?
Not me.
I've locked them out.
Yeah, you're smart. See, my door doesn't close. So what happens is the dog will be outside and then he will just bust through the door like the Kool-Aid man when I'm in the middle of something. So I try to bring him in beforehand, but there you go. Anyway, I am Matt Fox from the Departments of Epidemiology and Global Health at the Boston University School of Public Health. And I am joined once again by Dr. Chris Gill from the Department of Global Health. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Matt.
And I am also joined by Dr. Don Thea from the Department of Global Health. Welcome, Don.
Chris, Matt.
Hey, Don.
And as a reminder, if you could head on over to the Population Health Exchange website at www.pophealthex.org. That's BU's hub for lifelong learning. Lots of interesting public health programming tools and educational materials there. And also a reminder, if you could go and give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever your podcast app is, it helps other people find us. Guys, we have a couple of new reviews that I wanted to read to you. The first one is from, I'm going to say it's Y. Sanjay from the US. It is entitled Infotainment at its Best. It says, I love the science and the humor. Another 5-star rating.
Wow.
And the second one comes from Germany, from Cakenger. Cakenger, I don't know how you pronounce that. It says, I certainly have no clue what fractional veganism is supposed to be, but this is the best epidemiology podcast in the world. So a couple more happy listeners out there.
Wow.
Thank you very much for taking the time to write in. We very much appreciate it.
Yeah, we love it.
I would also say that there are probably not very many extraterrestrial epidemiology podcasts, so we might be the best in the universe.
At least the solar system.
It is probably true,
That's right.
although if you believe in the infinite worlds theory, there's got to be at least one more universe with a podcast on epidemiology out there. So there you go.
I hope we're better than they are.
Maybe there's a parallel universe with a really bad version of us.
Isn't that this universe?
They're probably hosted by a guy called Hat, Priss, and Con.
Bizarro world.
Yes, there you go. So now on to the show. So today in our first segment, which is our Journal Club segment, we are going to look at a study on the relationship between diabetes in pets and in their humans. Then in the second part of the podcast, which is our deep dive, we're going to talk about who won the showdown between Elsevier and the University of California. And then our third segment is our Amazing Amusing, where we get to some things that make us laugh out loud or, in Chris's case, tend to fascinate us. So let's get into our segment one. This was sent to us by Victoria Ryan from Drexel University, and it was interesting enough that we wanted to take it on. I do want to point out that this is from the Christmas edition of the BMJ. So, right. You can do what you want with that, but it is actually a real piece of research, at least, in my read of it. I'm sure it's entirely possible that I'm being completely duped here, but it seems like a real study, and it doesn't allude to being a joke in any way. So while it may be a little tongue-in-cheek, it does seem to be a real study worth investigating. So the article is entitled The Shared Risk of Diabetes Between Dog and Cat Owners and Their Pets. It was published in the BMJ. Oh, sorry. I messed up the title. The Shared Risk of Diabetes Between Dog and Cat Owners and Their Pets Registered-Based Cohort Study by first author Rachel Ann Delicano of the Department of Medical Sciences in Uppsala, Sweden. There were some headlines on this one. So The Guardian says dog and owners may share resemblance in diabetes risk, playing off the dogs and their owners look like each other. MedWire News says diabetes in dogs could serve as early warning to owners. I'm less clear on whether that one holds up.
Yeah, I don't think that's all what they said.
Yeah. News 18 says dogs have the same risk of diabetes as their owners, study finds. Again, not so sure. And
no.
Cosmos.
These people actually read the studies? My goodness.
They don't.
They don't.
They read the title.
They're just trying to be witty.
And ahead, Cosmos magazine says, do you both need to go walkies more?
Well, that was Cosmo? Okay. That was Cosmopolitan magazine?
I don't think that's Cosmo. Yeah.
Cosmo Kramer?
So anyway, whatever you want to do with that one. So,
all
right. Don, let me start with you, but before you tell us what this study was all about, are you a dog person or a cat person?
I'm a neither person, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay,
actually,
that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, if I had my druthers, I would own reptiles.
Oh, what kind?
Not a Komodo dragon, that's for sure.
Oh, okay. How about a monitor lizard?
I like geckos. I really, really like geckos.
They are cool.
I like anything that can regrow a limb.
Yeah. Can they do that?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
All right.
Well, Don, tell us what the study was about.
So my big question about this research study was why? Why would they do this study, and why is it of interest to look at the correlation in the development of diabetes between people and their pets? But in any event, this was actually a fairly interesting research project in terms of the way they did it in Sweden, which is a country like we've covered a number of times before with other sorts of research studies that use sort of national databases. And they had access to two national databases that they mined to generate the data for this particular study. And one was National Human Health Records, which Sweden, I think, keeps a complete set of national health records. And they also use the largest animal pet insurance company, which by their estimation has insurance coverage for 40% of the dogs in Sweden and 23% of the cats. So we start off with surprised me that it was that high, frankly. But still, it's far from complete. And, there's all sorts of bias that might be introduced by who can afford cat insurance and who can afford dog insurance. But in any event, so what they did is they linked these data sets, which is made possible by a unique Swedish ID number. And they found that there were 151,000 dog owners and 74,000 cat owners who were born before 1961. And they restricted it to that because they wanted to have a population of people who were older and at higher risk of potentially developing diabetes or having diabetes during the period January 2004 to December 2006, which is the period of observation from which they culled the data. They also included 94,000 spouses of the dog owners, which I thought was kind of curious, and 41,000 spouses of the cat owners. So you can begin to see how looking at the relationship between a human and a pet living in the household begins to get somewhat complex, because you've got dyads or pairs of people that are overlapping. So they excluded the 4,000 individuals who died or moved prior to the end of the observation period, or 2007, 7,000 people with unclear baseline or follow-up data, and they exclude people with more than 20 pets. Which
because they're just weirdos.
Well, because
they can.
They're weirdos or breeders.
No.
Or breeders.
Breeders.
Yeah. Right. So they're going to have less of a relationship with their animals. But they restricted it to people who, in fact, had less than 10 pets. So there were some people in this data set that had 9 pets. So they're not breeders.
Right.
They're just weirdos, maybe.
Well, they could be breeders. They're just fewer pets than where they decided to set the cutoff.
Less prolific breeders is what they are. And if an individual owned a dog and a cat, they did a separate analysis for each of those pair. And I guess if you had several dogs, they did a separate analysis for each one of those dogs and that owner. So their final data set include 208,000 dogs and 100 dog owners and 123,000 cat owners. And they had 175. We've got comments from a dog owner's dog here. in the background. I hear that, Matt.
We do. My dog has been sitting here reviewing this study in excruciating detail.
I'm sure your dog has lots of comments on this. All right, so we have 175,000 dog owner dog pairs, and I think somewhat less cat owner cat pairs. So what they did is they took these dyads, and if the dog and if the owner and the animal had diabetes at baseline, they were omitted from the analysis because there's nowhere to go. They censored any deaths, loss to follow-ups, or owners and dog pairs who either terminated their pet insurance or emigrated out of the country. And then they looked at transitions during this period of time, and there were 4 possible transmissions where the owner was negative and the dog was negative, and switched to the owner being positive, meaning developed diabetes, and the dog didn't. Both were negative, and then the dog developed diabetes, but the owner didn't. The dog had diabetes and transitioned to the owner plus the dog having diabetes, and vice versa. The owner had diabetes, the dog didn't, and then transitioning to both having diabetes. And they calculated the hazard ratios for each of these transitions separately for dog owners and for cat owners. And they adjusted for age, sex of the owner, pet, and the breed group. And this is something that I didn't really realize, but apparently is a thing, that there are breeds of cat and breeds of dog that have a higher propensity for developing diabetes. And a few of the high-risk diabetes dog breeds are West Highland White Terrier, Hamilton Hound, poodles, miniature or toy poodles have a tendency to develop diabetes. And then low risk of diabetes would be Jack Russell Terrier, miniature dachshunds, German shepherds, bearded collies. And then as far as cat, I thought this might be of interest to the listener. As far as cat breeds are concerned, a high risk of developing diabetes are Burmese cats, Russian blue cats, Norwegian forest cats, European short hairs, and the ones that are low risk of developing diabetes are the Maine coon cat, the British short hair, the Siberian, the ragdoll, and the Bengal cat. I've not heard about the. Hopefully, that's not a Bengal tiger. So, in any event, they adjusted for breed group, SES, country of birth, population density, and a bunch of other factors. So, as far as the results are concerned, 94% of the dog pairs in neither of the individuals was there diabetes or did diabetes develop. So they're really looking at 6% of this whole cohort, and the median follow-up was about 3.5 years. The incidence of diabetes in the dog owners was 7.7 cases per 1,000 person years follow-up, and 1.3 cases per 1,000 dog years of follow-up. And that immediately raises the question of, do they really mean dog years, or do they mean people years in dog?
Mm-hmm. Did they divide by 7, or how do you convert?
I don't know. They don't specify. They basically said 1,000 dog years.
I'd say that's a major limitation.
I think it is too.
No, I think a dog year was a human year in a dog.
Yes,
or maybe they just did it in dog years and multiplied by 7.
Yeah, could be. I don't know.
Maybe.
I think it's
actually be much quicker.
It's an absolute failing that they didn't explain what they did or didn't do, because of course it's going to come up.
Maybe the Swedes don't think about dog years like we do.
Maybe not. So in any event, so the incidence of diabetes in owners is 7-fold greater than it is in dogs. But when they looked at the hazard ratio of developing diabetes in the owner of the dog, it was, in fact, statistically significant. There's about a 30% increase likelihood that you would develop diabetes if your dog had diabetes. And there was about a 20% increase in the hazard ratio of developing diabetes in the dog if the owner had diabetes. Mm-hmm. Now they did this. They did the same analysis for cats, and they found that cats also had a lower incidence of diabetes than humans. But that there was no association with the development of diabetes in the human if the cat had it, or in the cat if the human had it.
Right. That rings true to me, by the way. I think this is an important internal control.
No, I think you're right, Chris.
You're going to have to say more.
I think you're right. No, it really does make a lot of sense. So anyway, that's the bottom line, is that if your dog develops diabetes, you should probably get a fasting blood sugar.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Okay,
Well, it's
so
the ultimate nature versus nurture analysis, right? Because we will stipulate that there's no genetic linkage between the dog and the dog's owner, right? One would assume.
correct.
So
Right.
any
Correct.
effects are entirely due to nurture rather than nature.
That is probably true.
You know, as a dog owner, I have 2 dogs and I have a cat, right? And so I can say unequivocally that the cat does not give a fig what I do. The cat's behavior is up to the cat. He is not influenced by my encouragements or my discouragements. He is just on his own pathways. So the idea that my behaviors will somehow affect the cat seems to be a little bit tenuous. But on the other hand, the dogs are totally tuned into me and they want to do what I want to do. And so if I'm like lazing about the house, they laze about the house. But if I say, hey, let's go walkies, they're like, let's go walkies. Yes. You know, so, you know, I kind of see that like my behavior has a great effect on my dog. And I could also imagine very easily that if I had purchased a dog that was, you know, let's say kind of a lazy dog, like a basset hound who just wants to sleep all day, you know, that I would like probably get down on the rug with the basset hound and sleep all day. So I also can imagine that it's bidirectional. Right? That I am riffing off of my dog's behavior. It's not just the dog mimics me, but I may in fact mimic the dog. So I think this is groundbreaking stuff.
Okay, so Chris, you seem to buy it. Now I do worry that this entire episode is going to turn into us telling stories about our pets, but I do have to say that, Don, you mentioned in the beginning that one of the cat breeds that was at low risk for diabetes was the Maine Coon, and I had a Maine Coon cat for a long time named Ira, and Ira one time brought and he oh yeah, you would remember Ira caught and brought into our house a live crow. I don't know how he caught the thing.
Wow.
But he caught it. It was bigger than he was, and he dragged it into our house. It was anyway. So okay, so Chris, you seem, I can't tell based on the way you were laughing whether you truly buy this or whether you're just you're making the observation that people tend to behave like their dogs in particular, not so much like their cats. Presumably, if this is real, and I will stipulate that it's if this is real, but if this is real, it's not causal, right? Presumably, your pet getting diabetes does not cause you to get diabetes, right?
No. No, okay. It does not. But it is a matter of shared risk factors.
Sure. And I think that's interesting because, again, if it could be potentially an early warning sign to humans, hey, you may be at risk for diabetes, then you could use that in an interesting way. But the reason I bring it up is if the reason to do this is for reasons of correlation and not causation, and I apologize for turning a study that we clearly find amusing into a serious methods point. But if that's the case, then why adjust for a bunch of things, right? The idea here is not to try and say, what is the effect of pet diabetes on human diabetes? It's to say, does having a pet, or in this case a dog with diabetes, signal that the human is more likely to develop, in which case you don't want to adjust for a whole bunch of things. You might adjust for a few things. There are some reasons why you might do it. But I found that curious that you would ever, unless you believe this to be a causal relationship, that you would do all this statistical adjustment that they did. So that's sort of my main critique of the study.
What would be the factors that you think would be reasonable to adjust for in this setting?
So it's not that you would want to adjust for anything specifically so much as you might want to stratify it. If you believe that the correlation was different for, older pet owners than younger pet owners, which would make sense to me, then you might stratify by, age and sex, but you wouldn't adjust for it specifically. You just look at whether the correlations are different. Now, that does obviously inherently do some statistical adjustment, but it's the point being you want to know, is the prediction better in certain groups? Because then you would say, if you're a 23-year-old and your dog develops diabetes, this isn't anything to worry about as a human. But if you're a 45-year-old and your pet develops diabetes, then you should worry. We'd want to know that. But that's different from saying we still think it's, the dog getting diabetes causes you to get diabetes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what about, like, if you were to be a little bit bolder here and try to argue that there is a causal relationship, like, let's just say,
okay,
for instance,
let's go there.
Okay,
let's go there.
This is dangerous, but let's play this out a little bit. You would probably want to know a lot more about these dog pet diets, right? You want to know, what is the exercise habits of the dog? How many times does the pet owner take the dog out for walks? Does the pet owner ever take the dog out for walks? Does the pet owner use a dog walker instead of taking the dog out for walks? Like, if you're thinking that, I have diabetes and I became diabetic because I was overweight, and I became overweight because I didn't actually, I was sedentary, for example. I'm sort of describing, the hypothetical me here. I could imagine that those behavioral traits would maybe in subtle or not so subtle ways affect the way I reared my pet. And so I would not exercise the pet and I might overfeed the pet. I'm overfeeding myself. Maybe I give the dog twice as many kibbles as the dog would need. And so I'm sort of like, I'm doing to the dog what in a sense I'm doing to myself. And that is why we both got diabetes. And so that is kind of a causal relationship in a way, right? If we're thinking about it as a set of behaviors that probably originates in the owner rather than in the pet. Though I suppose it could go in both ways, but because the owner has the decision-making power, I would say it's more likely to go in that direction than the other.
Interesting. It's an interesting take. I mean, I still think you're talking about shared risk that rather than one, having your pet's diabetes cause your diabetes.
Right, but it's a little bit different from saying, like, we both live near the nuclear power plant, right? And that's why we both got lymphoma, right? It's not that my lymphoma caused the dog's lymphoma, it's because we're both proximate to the lymphoma-inducing agent. But here, the distinction is that the behavior that increases my risk for diabetes could be the same behavior in terms of my pet rearing style that would increase the dog's risk for diabetes. And so that's why I think that there is a little bit more of an argument to be made for causality in this example.
Well, again, I still don't think, though, the causality I agree with, but the causality is the shared behaviors. It's not the diabetes in the pet causing the diabetes in the owner. It's the reason that the dog is getting the diabetes is the same reason that the owner is getting diabetes. So it's cause. I mean, obviously there is a cause of both sources of diabetes, but it's a common source. It's not that one case of diabetes is causing the other.
Okay, so in that sense, it does mean we have to go backwards. We're not. I see your point entirely now. It's not the diabetes per se. It is the risk factors that created the diabetes that is actually the explanatory variable. But that's somewhere upstream that we have not observed and has not been described in this analysis.
In fact, the authors cite other work that showed that there was a strong association between the use of dog treats and the owner weight. So it's entirely possible that, in fact, that kind of behavior where you're giving your dog a lot of treats or a lot of table scraps correlates well with your overweight status. In fact, sort of underscores what you're saying, Chris, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so there is a direct sort of interrupted chain of causality there along the lines of what you were saying, Matt.
Yeah, but again, just to emphasize that I don't think that the one case of diabetes is causing the other. It's the shared chain of
right.
causation.
I think we all agree with that.
The other thing that they bring up as a I don't want to say explanation, but as explaining some of the correlation is, or maybe they didn't bring it up in quite as much detail, but I was thinking about it, is the surveillance bias problem. That if you have a pet who develops diabetes, you suddenly learn more about diabetes, become more aware of diabetes, and then you go and get your diabetes checked. So you find out you have diabetes. And I wouldn't think that would explain the entire correlation, but it does seem to me like it could explain some of it. I don't know if you guys had the same reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
No, possible. Yep. Very possible.
Okay, so where do you land on this? Should everybody have a dog after a certain age so that we can use dogs as our...
No, clearly everybody should have a cat. That'll prevent diabetes.
No, I don't think that is... I don't think that is the message here. I think that
no, of course.
having a cat...
That's totally what we've concluded, isn't it?
I am pretty sure you are officially uninvited from guest lecturing in any of my epidemiology courses. Okay. Well, in that case, why don't we move on to our second segment?
There's one other issue when you're comparing sort of the cat dog relationship to diabetes, and that is that, and I didn't realize this, that it is Swedish law that you have to walk your dog every 6 hours, and they don't have the same law for cats.
What? So. You can't walk a cat?
Yeah, you can't. That's really cruel.
Have you ever tried to walk a cat? You can't.
No, I haven't.
You can't walk a cat. I used to live.
The attempts to do so are well documented in the story of the three-fingered man.
The three-fingered man? Oh, yeah, the guy lost his fingers because he tried to walk a cat.
Right.
Got it. Yep, took me a second there. Sorry about that one. Okay, let's move on to our second segment, which is our deep dive. And so we talked about on an earlier episode of the podcast the standoff that was happening between the publisher Elsevier, which we all agree charges a ridiculous amount of money for its publications, and that libraries end up paying exorbitant fees to access the journals, where many of their authors, many of their faculty members are publishing and paying exorbitant fees to publish at least open access in these same journals, while also doing peer review for these journals for free. So we took issue with the business model and the fact that these companies were making excessive amounts of money off of this. So the University of California basically said they were not going to continue to subscribe to all of the Elsevier journals. Elsevier is one of the largest publishers of academic journals or scientific journals. And so there was sort of a standoff, and they have now come to a resolution. So this was an article that was covering this that talked about, they say 2 years after the University of California in a push for open access to publicly funded research, the University of California and Elsevier are able to bridge differences and reach an agreement that is mutually beneficial while helping advance the critical work of researchers worldwide. And this was a press release from the university. So they've got a 4-year deal in which all research with a University of California lead author published in any of Elsevier's many journals will have their research published open access by default. And these, include a whole number of journals, including the Cell journals, the Lancet family of journals, which are, some of the top scientific research journals. University researchers will also be able to read articles published in Elsevier journals, so they'll have, again, access to these journals. And they're going to do it, so there's these fees for open access publishing. They're going to be able to do it at a substantially reduced fee structure. So I don't know if either of you went in and actually read the details of the agreement. But in the agreement they say, University of California researchers can now publish open access in more than 2,500 Elsevier journals with significant support from the library. They will get a reduced article processing charge for all articles, 15% for most journals and 10% for journals from Lancet and Cell. Full coverage of the article processing charge by the library for authors who do not have access to grant funding, and partial coverage of article processing charges by the library for authors who are able to contribute from their grants. When I first read this, I assumed that the reduced article processing charge was 15% of the fee. So if it was or 10% of the fee, so if it was $1,000, it would become $100. dollars, but I now realize it's 15. I think it means a 15% reduction. So it's still going to be a substantial fee, but they're going to support their University of California authors in being able to cover that fee, which, is something that I think would help a lot of us who, even if we have grant funding that can cover some of the fees, it may only cover one publication for that particular grant or two publications, when you may in fact have 4 or 5 different publications, and then you're scrambling to find funding for those remaining publications. So, Chris, let me start with you. Do you think that the University of California won here, or did they essentially accept an agreement that is, better than what most libraries are getting, but is still essentially a substantial cost to the university, while not really putting a huge dent in Elsevier's profits? What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I'm struggling to come up with something clever to say at this point. I actually have very little to say about whether I think they won or lost. I think the whole publishing model is still kind of bonkers. And I guess, it was great that the University of California pushed back and got themselves a discount. But is that really the big problem here? That, the cost of paying for publications by researchers is the problem? Or is it really the publishing model itself is kind of wacky? We recently got invited to submit an article for some journal on some topic that they wanted us to write about. And so a bunch of us got together and we wrote this paper. None of us were grant funded to do this. It took a certain amount of time, so, we're basically taking time out of our funded activities to do this activity for free. And then at the end of it, the journal wanted us to pay publication charges. And I just thought that was outrageous, right? Like, you asked for the damn article. We spent our time. We didn't get paid for it. And now you want us to pay you? So
and
that you have this article.
This was a reputable journal, Chris? This was not a predatory journal?
It was a real journal. It was a real journal. I won't name it by name, but, it felt like, here's such an egregious example of the insanity of the publication model, that we have now contributed labor for free and are expected to pay the journal to do the thing that they asked us to do. I mean, it just made me so cross.
Wow, that is really, really indicative of how messed up this model is.
Yeah.
That seems like a particularly egregious one.
Did you pay it?
Yeah, I did not pay it. I don't know who paid it or how it got resolved, but as far as I know, it got paid. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are all in agreement that the funding model is pretty messed up. What seems strange to me is the fact that it continues, because, certainly we all rely on these journals. They publish a substantial amount of the content that we need to access to be able to do our research, and they are the place where we can put our research. But I mean, given that everyone agrees that they're making an exorbitant amount of money off this, and everyone seems to agree in academia that the funding model is messed up, why is it that we can't all seem to come together to put a stop to it? Because again, if we all were to agree for the next, pick an amount of time, for the next year, all academics are just going to say, we're not going to publish in any of your journals until you change your business model. And we're going to all publish, open access online, make up your own journal or a journal that does have or we're just going to do preprints or whatever it is. Presumably we could exert real power. And yet there just doesn't seem to be any appetite for taking on the fight either, which is why the University of California seems to be doing it alone. So, I don't know what the reason is, but it just seems like this is a fight that could be won. Maybe I'm overly naive. Don, do you see a future where this changes?
I do. I agree with you, Matt, and I think that it's both exploitative, and it gets in the way of the free exchange of scientific information, and it deprives large portions of the world of the critical information that is needed to make science go forward. But I do think that the sort of ambient regard of this situation is changing. And I think that the University of California is not as big a victory as we would have liked to have seen, but it is a victory. And I think that The NIH has pushed back hard, on the fee for publication and the limited availability by insisting that anything that the NIH funds has to also be available through the NIH for free. And I think the Gates Foundation is moving in that direction. Not only making the reports available at no cost, but also making sure that the data itself is available at no cost. So I agree. We're not there yet at all by any means, but I do see movement in that direction, and I can only keep my fingers crossed that it's going to continue, because it is a sick system. It really is. It just is so infuriating.
Yeah.
I also know people that are refusing to do reviews because unless they get, some sort of concession from a particular journal in terms of lowering the publication fees for X number of reviews that you do. But they get free labor, and they just extract so much money for all this free labor.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose that would be another way to grind the system to a halt, would be if everyone, instead of just continued to submit their articles as usual, but refused to do peer review. Now, I mean, there is really important research that needs to get out there, so we don't want to stop publishing, but there's nothing that says that your article has to be published in the Lancet in order for it to have an impact. We could set up a system that is parallel, that does the same function. We still go through peer review, we just don't do it through a journal and publish things online. But that would take people being willing to take the risk of giving up a Lancet paper or a New England Journal of Medicine paper in order for the greater long-term benefit. And I don't, that's not happening anytime soon, it seems.
I think the other thing that is going to be corrosive to this issue is, over the course of the last year, preprints have become, they're controversial, but they have become sort of the standard with which the information is getting out of the academy and into the field, as it were. And it's got good aspects and it's got bad aspects. But I think that the top tier journals, really, their business model is dependent upon their being the providers of the really newsworthy information, or the really impactful scientific research. And I think that is also under assault because of the move towards preprints.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, Don, for the top tier journals. But for anything below that top tier, I don't know whether they really are the arbiters of the, or not arbiters, but of the ones bringing forward the really, exciting, new, groundbreaking research. And, I mean, those journals are also still requiring us to pay fees, still requiring us to, or asking us to be reviewers. They still seem to be making a heck of a lot of money off of this system that we have of using journals as a stamp of approval. And, let's be honest. I mean, universities look at the quality of your journal when you go up for promotion. So if we were all just say, hey, for the next, however long it takes, nobody's going to publish in these big name journals, then, you're taking a risk in terms of your career. So it just feels like we have given them so much power. It's very hard to take it away.
There's a rule at the New England Journal of Medicine. I don't know if it's an official rule, or if it ever was an official rule, or if it's even in place anymore. It's called the Inglefinger. I think it's the Inglefinger rule, where if you had pre-announced the findings of a paper at a national symposium, or had published it in any way, shape, or form previously, that the New England Journal then would not accept that particular research finding. And I always saw that as they need to maintain their primacy in terms of splash, in terms of impact, in terms of being the place where the most newsworthy research comes out first. And, it's a small step, but maybe these preprints are starting to chip away at that. But, I would love it if somebody could pull together the entire academic community. And in essence, what you're saying is boycott the top tier journals until they comply. But I don't have great hopes that that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate. I share your feeling on that one. Let's hope that things go in a better direction, but for now we'll wait and see.
Were either of you guys surprised at this claim that 10% of all U.S. research flows through the University of California system? I was astonished by that.
It's a big system.
I don't know. I mean, so if you just think about California is as a state, as an economy, it's massive. So I suppose in some sense it doesn't surprise me that it accounts for a huge amount of the research in the United States. But I suppose on the other hand, they're also not the only universities within California. So it's a big number.
It's a big number. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you think of UCSF, at UCLA, and Berkeley. Those are powerhouses, and there's a lot of research that comes out of those three institutions alone. And then there's half a dozen other UC campuses, and then UC State also. So it's a huge system.
Yeah. Wow. I was struck by that. I hadn't imagined it to be quite such a large fraction.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to our last segment, which is our amazing and amusing. And I'm gonna go first here because I have a short one that's gonna build on this idea of issues with journals. This is a story about an article that came out in March of 2020 in the American Journal of Biomedical Science and Research, and it was a COVID paper. The title of the paper was Siliage City COVID-19 Outbreak Linked to Zubat Consumption. And the thing about Zubat, Zubat, Zubat
what
consumption.
Is
that? So that is the point, that Zubat is a Pokemon character. And so this was a made-up sting type article done to expose a predatory journal. Now we have talked about many of these stings, over a period of time. This one was done by an author named Matan Shalomi. So why am I talking about this, given that we have talked about so many of these stings exposing predatory journals? What is particularly new about this one? And the thing that I found really interesting about this one is that the article, this wasn't the only article, but he had other articles that fell along these lines. The article itself contained lines in the text such as, "A journal publishing this paper does not practice peer review and must therefore be predatory." Or, This invited article is in a predatory journal that likely does not practice peer review. And it got published anyway. So it's like, let's just put it completely out there.
What was the journal?
The point.
It was the American Journal of Biomedical Science and Research. But I just thought, wow, that's taking it to a whole new level if you're just going to tell them in the paper this is a sting, and they don't even bother to read it. So that one made me quite happy.
Wow,
that's awesome.
All right, Chris, what do you got?
That is really
scraping
impressive.
the bottom of our barrel of cynicism there. That is going deep.
Exactly.
So, I'm a huge fan of American-style Chinese food, and I particularly like Peking dumplings, Peking raviolis, and I have a very strong preference for pan-fried over steamed. Pan-fried, in my view, are like the only way to really enjoy a Peking ravioli.
Chris, can I stop you?
Yes.
Can I stop you and just show you? You? I don't know if you won't be able to see it because it's not going to come up on the screen very well. In my inbox is a recipe for how to make Peking dumplings.
Awesome. Well, there is a reason, perhaps, why you and I and Don, I think, prefer the pan-seared version versus the steamed version. And it has to do with the Maillard reaction, Maillard.
I know about that reaction.
Yes. This is Food Chemistry 101. It is why so many of our favorite foods taste so good. And it is a chemical reaction between an amino acid and a sugar that occurs at a high temperature, and it creates those beautiful brown toned crusts on like your roast beef or on your pan-fried dumpling, or even when you're baking bread, the outside of the bread, that when it turns golden brown like that, is an example of the Maillard reaction. And these set of compounds, which may heat and form hundreds of subsidiary compounds are what give rise to so many of the delicious things that we associated with baking and roasting, including coffee and marshmallows and chocolate and roasted meats and baked bread. And all of those are examples of the Maillard reaction. And I was thinking there's got to be a reason why it is that people don't like to boil their beef nearly as much as they like to grill their beef. And this is why, is because those crusts on the outside taste so great. And one of the things I was looking at the Wikipedia description of the Maillard reaction that is a common misconception is that when we talk about caramelized onions, caramelization technically is when you're burning the sugars. It's basically burnt sugar. Whereas the Maillard reaction is an interaction between amino acids in the food and the sugars. And so it's a totally different thing. But technically speaking, when we talk about caramelized onions, we're really talking about Maillard reactions in the onions. It's not caramelization, actually. It's another example of the Maillard reaction, which is why boiled onions do not taste nearly as good as fried onions.
Oh, God.
When they're dark and black and they get kind of that sort of salty, meaty flavor, that's the Maillard reaction. And it's a little bit like, why we love the flavor of umami in general. And the roasting process is what brings out that umami. So we're heading into spring and I'm thinking about my grill and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to burn some meat, God damn it.
All right.
And the conclusion is, Chris, everything is science.
That's right. Exactly.
Everything is science. Even Peking dumplings.
Yep. Matt, what's up?
Chris just has to follow the science.
Yep. We're slaves to it.
All right. So this week, Don is out on the Amazing and Amusing. So that is the end of our program. So if you have any feedback on this or any other episode, or you want to suggest a study or a topic for us to take on, you can tweet us at PopHealthEX, or you can tweet me at ProfMattFox, or Don at DTheo1, or Chris at ID.Gill. Or you can find us on the Population Health Exchange website at www.pophealthex.org. We want to thank Leslie Talalian, Assistant Dean of Lifelong Learning at the BU School of Public Health, for supporting the podcast, and Nick Guler for sound editing and remembering every episode that we have ever done and every detail contained therein. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you will download our next episode.